So, boys,
Yeah.
it had to happen eventually.
Oh,
What did?
I mean, the fact that it's no secret. I posted on Twitter. This is not the first time we will be discussing the moose this week.
Yep.
no. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the first recording was so good too. Tyler was awesome.
It was excellent.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
were funny. We were dynamite. Tyler was throwing a lot of knowledge bombs out there.
I
Yep.
hope I remember everything that I said. Probably not, but I'll try.
Please
I
keep
remember-
your
I
budding
remember some of
alcoholism
it.
to yourself.
Okay.
This is
Can you stop projecting on our guest, please?
Probably
4 months
not.
alcohol anonymous.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Best Cure Anywhere podcast. For those of you that follow us on Twitter, you know that I had a moment of crisis on Monday. One of the podcasts I listen to is the Cortex podcast, and one of the hosts of that podcast is CGP Grey. It's not important if you know who he is, but he has a dictum that I failed to adhere to, and that is that one copy is none copy. 2 copies is 1 copy. I foolishly did not have any backup recordings set up for any of the episodes we've done so far, and of course, on the day we have our first guest, Craig, our shitty little Discord recording bot, we love him anyway, failed to record 2 of the 4 people that were talking. So here we are again to discuss Season 1, Episode 5, The Moose. But before we do any of that, how's everyone doing today?
I took a nap.
Nap?
Tyler took a
Okay.
nap.
yeah.
I will repeat a little bit of the discussion we had. We were
And I worked.
because the timeline doesn't change for the people listening to this podcast. My hiking trip was excellent up to the Hoover Wilderness. The fishing was good.
Really good. I saw those photos. Those were some big friggin'
Yeah.
rainbows.
18 and 16-inch rainbow trout out of Fremont Lake up there out in Mono County. So yeah, I highly recommend. You have to hike to them though. It's an 8-mile hike into that. Like, who's jingling keys? I'm gonna hit you.
Jingling keys?
I hear someone that sounds like they're like bouncing a sack of, like an old leather sack of coins that they're on their way to deposit with Scrooge. Like,
Oh
I don't
my
know.
gosh. That's how I should store my coins from now.
Yeah.
is that not how you store your coins? You live in Kansas. I figured
I
that's
have an
just, like-
abalone shell that I throw my coins and keys and knives into.
my God. Of course you do.
Anyway, again, to reiterate things that we've already discussed at length, Jasky, how was your Tahoe trip? You can give us the
Oh,
truncated
it was
version.
most excellent. Yes. Most
You came
excellent.
back.
I mean, I did return, yes, but it was I think 5 days up in Tahoe to just kind of do whatever I felt like, go to the beach, walk around, see the trees. It was great. It was great.
Awesome. And I cannot
Yeah.
neglect, we have to pretend like, again, we haven't done all this before. We have our very first guest, sort of, our 1.5 times guest now.
Guest 1.5.
Guest 1.5 of the podcast, our friend from camp. He is a CNA, also much more knowledgeable about Asian cultures, specifically Korean culture, than any
So
of us
I
3
am
white
one.
boys. Because he is a Korean. Yeah, we didn't
Yeah.
just bring another white guy.
I mean, I'm like multiple races at once. However, I'm 3 in total. But however, one of them is Asian, Korean specifically.
Our friend Tyler. Hello, Tyler.
Hello.
Welcome back. Sort of. Welcome and welcome back. In this very weird, out-of-time episode. How are you doing today, bud?
I'm pretty okay. I worked, and then now I'm on the text thing with Amazon, and I took a nap. Got
Mm.
my EMT course registered, and then like now I'm here.
Nice.
I had food also at some points today, and some water.
Good. Hydrate or dihydrate.
Yeah.
Hydrate or dihydrate.
In a weird way, it's actually kind of nice that we're recording this episode again, because I feel like it was kind of weird that it's like, hi, we haven't spoken in 6 months. Welcome to our podcast. Let's talk for an hour.
Yeah.
But like in the last week, we've talked at length about many things, so it feels a little more natural.
Fluid.
But it also gives me the opportunity to ask a question I want to ask at the beginning of the podcast this time. What is your familiarity with MASH before we get into it?
Oh yeah, so I basically watched MASH like when I was in Santa Cruz when I was like 12 or something like that because it randomly appeared on the TV. And you know, it was just me, some pineapple juice, and MASH, and I watched a few episodes and was like, damn, this is cool. And then I got really into the theme song as a 12-year-old, which was kind of problematic and explains how I am today.
Famous
And
name.
yeah, and
Mhm,
it's a
mhm.
good song. And then obviously, I've like read up and heard a lot about it over the years. I'm not like an avid super fan or anything like that, but it's interesting. This has definitely made me kind of more interested, watch more. So yeah,
Awesome.
because of the
And
week time thing. Yeah.
and it won't. I feel so bad because it won't be as funny as the time we brought it up. But I still feel like I need to bring it up. I knew we were gonna have Tyler. I knew before I even knew I was gonna start this podcast that if I ever did do this podcast, Tyler would have to be a guest because when we worked at Camp Winton together, we would talk about a great many things. And one day, it was just one of those weeks at camp where everything seemed to be going wrong and everyone seemed low-key pissed off about something. And then, like, on Wednesday, there were no more chicken nuggets at lunch for the staff after the kids got to eat, and that just, like, set everyone off. And you introduced me to my favorite Korean term on this
Mhm.
planet. Please explain to us what Han is again, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so Han is an interesting topic. It's the kind of exact translation is just a deep sadness, but the kind of more colloquial expression means like the suffering of all of the Korean people in history.
Hmm.
Um, you
And,
know, yeah.
and, and they announced to us, yeah, there's no more chicken nuggets, and you from behind me just go, Big Han. Big Han. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Not having chicken nuggets is equal to the entire suffering of the Korean people, and you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Now, now, I may not know much, and I don't, but I know that those Koreans suffered an awful lot.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
have.
yeah, if you want to have a really depressing Wikipedia trip, look at some of Korean history, apparently, we learned. Not always great.
That's a lot of the Southeast Asian Pacific Islander nations. Yeah, it's it's not it's not all fun and rainbows. Sadly,
Anyway, enough rambling. Let's get into it. Season 1, Episode 5, The Moose. I stated in kind of the lead up to this episode, this is our first attempt at a kind of moral crusade for the cast. Up until now, it's been how do we illegally acquire more medicine? And 2 episodes on how do we keep a nurse in camp, and then the best episode in my opinion so far, Chief Surgeon Who. So it's been kind of a mishmash of different plot lines, but this is the first one where there's like a discernible like humanitarian like discussion being had, and I think it was handled reasonably well, but we'll get into it. The episode starts off with a sergeant arriving in camp with his young Korean servant, let's put it that way.
indentured servants.
Indentured servant, yes. It's Sergeant Baker and his young indentured servant, Young Hee, who is played by Virginia Ann Lee. And we spoke about this at length. I think one of the reasons I like this episode so much is that Virginia Ann Lee steals the show. This whole episode.
I mean, she's just such a bright ray of sunshine compared to everyone else. It in a regular episode, I feel like she wouldn't stand out as much, but since it's dealing with such a heavy topic, it really stands out.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you mentioned that we're going to be fortunate enough to see her in a couple more roles down the line. Maybe nothing as substantial, but still.
I think we get her in one role that's kind of equal to this one. But yeah, most of the time we're going to see Virginia Lee again. It's as a side, kind of a background character. But in this episode in particular, I think she is fantastic. And we get Sergeant Baker, her owner. God, I hate saying that. Even the second time recording, all this is going to feel really weird to say. So yeah, we get introduced to that, and they run into Hawkeye, Trapper, and by complete surprise, Spear Chucker, who is apparently given things to do in this episode.
It was nice to see him again.
Yeah.
Don't get used to it.
Yeah, don't get used to it.
Yeah.
So they meet the captains. They instruct him where he can find Colonel Blake, and then he gives a laundry list of tasks for the day to Young Hee, which, as he's doing so, clearly confuses the trio. And Hawkeye makes a point to call him out, what's going on here? And we talked about it a little bit. Baker says the gooks, they don't mind working. And we had a nice little discussion about this, and I wonder if we can kind of recreate it a little bit. I didn't know initially if this was a term that was normal or if this was kind of a Hollywood made up slur, but Tyler, you shared with us that yes, this is in fact a very common Southeast Asian slur. And you kind of gave us the history behind how it came to be, and I thought it was interesting. Terrible preface, but interesting.
Yeah, so Korean, like the actual language itself is called 한국어. So like, literally means Korean language. Korean's a really direct and blunt language. Anyways, obviously the kind of middle of that guk is the slur. That's where the slur comes from. And also if you want to add that the people, like Korean people, are called 한국인. So yeah, no, that's where the history comes from. I actually personally learned kind of semi recently that it's an actual slur and it's not just something that was made up during like the Vietnam War as just a random.
Because I thought it was absolutely a slur made up in Vietnam.
Yeah, I thought it was too.
And I thought it was kind of like more making fun of the language, how there's a lot of hard guttural sounds. So, you'll get, I'm not even going to pretend to attempt Vietnamese. But if you've heard someone speak Vietnamese or Southeast Asian language, you could very easily see how someone would take some of those hard consonants and turn it into a slur. But it kind of blew my mind when you shared with us that, gook actually comes from the Korean War, which is kind of weird because the Korean War in general is known as the Forgotten War. So I'm wondering if that's something they got carried down through.
Yeah, I mean, probably. The way that I learned about this initially is my uncle literally coming up to me and we talked about slurs for some reason at a family event, as you do. It's not something that we like, like Asian slurs specifically though. So it's not like, we were just throwing around, all of the.
I'm sure being a mixed race person, you're like, wow, there's a lot of things people can call me.
Yeah, it's interesting, since it could be called Latino stuff, white stuff, and then Asian stuff. So that's fun. But the thing is that, yeah, no, it is a Korean word, and I was also surprised about that. But it's derived from the language and actually has a lot of history behind it. Yeah.
All right. But in response to this, we get the first instance of Mad Hawkeye. Like, genuinely, not just annoyed or flustered, we are righteously angry Hawkeye, who flexes what little authority he has and is like, yeah, no, you're not going to do that in this camp while you're here. And Baker's kind of like, whatever. And we get to kind of learn that, and again, Tyler, you shared some very keen insight with us, that this is apparently a normal thing, but maybe not in the context that we're seeing it. And even in the swamp, the guys are talking about like, oh, she's a moose, Japanese, musame for girl. And the first question I think Hawkeye has, is it Hawkeye that asks what's Japanese for sleeping together? And I like the show acknowledges that's a possibility, but they're saying in this instance, no, we're not touching that with a 10-foot pole. But apparently this was a common thing.
Yeah, so there was a lot of issues with comfort women and like prostitution. I mean, actually during the Korean War it wasn't really like an issue. I mean, it was, but not in the same context of like World War II. Because in World War II, when the Japanese military was just storming through East Asia and stuff, it was more of an issue of comfort women by force, not necessarily comfort women by, even though it sucks still, they were just being comfort women to make money. Because during the Korean War, the like Korean government and the American government, or the United States government, kind of collaborated and made almost like legal prostitution. And through that avenue, you'd see Korean women doing similar things, like being sold into like army camps or to like people and stuff. And there might have been a few cases where like families, like in this case, sold just direct to an individual, a family member, but it would have been more common to see them, like I said, in like a prostitute sort of role, and what they allude in the show. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's, again, I think that this is an interesting first moral crusade episode. It's not there are some later in the series that are way, I don't want to say heavy-handed, but they are much more nuanced, and there's even one I can think of right now that I can't wait to get to years from now that is actually ends the episode on a gray area. Yeah, it's about gorillas. Not
Oh.
not like banana gorillas, like
Not
gorilla
Harambe?
fighters.
Oh.
Yeah, it's that's also a great episode because Mako is in it, but
Oh,
but he's kind of the bad guy. It's a great episode. I can't wait till we get to it because it is.
spoilers.
Wait,
I'm sorry,
my
but
guy, you can't
no,
just drop
like
that
the
on me.
moment he comes on screen, it's clear he's the bad guy. It's not a spoiler, but I can't wait to discuss this episode. But in the Moose specifically, it seems like a topic where they could have gotten very deep into it, but they kept it kind of like let's ease our way into this, and it actually, I think it pays off really well. But
Do you think this was the writers actually trying to start taking the show in that direction, or do you think this was just something they kind of wanted to do?
I think yes, because here's the funny thing. The production order of the order they filmed the episodes is not the order we're watching them. And if you watch them if you look at the order they were produced, it's very clear that the further into production they got, the more the writers were like, okay, the order we got them in is the order that ABC, whatever company decided to air them. Basically, they just kind of picked and chose it at random. This isn't a plot driven, there's no through plot lines in anything. It's just episode to episode, so they can do that. But so Hawkeye, Trapper, and the gang are wondering why the hell are they there for democracy if someone can own a human being. And again, it's a very easy moral argument for the show to take, is owning people is wrong. I think 99.9999% of human beings on this planet can probably agree with that. That's not a big reach, but it leads us into a pretty decent moral argument.
Yeah, it's just I don't want to be too harsh on them taking a pretty easy stance, because I know that they will start taking more stances, but I still want to kind of wait and see how they go about these other stances first before kind of not really passing judgment, but you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's okay, good first attempt, but is this as far as you're gonna push that line? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think they push it as far as a daily, weekly sitcom on television in the 70s and 80s could. But anyway. So they go to Henry, which is interesting because Henry basically says he can't do anything. He has, as we're going to learn in a later scene, Henry and Hawkeye and Trapper, even though they outrank Baker, basically have no authority to do anything. And we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit. But the other interesting thing about this scene is this is the second to least episode in terms of how much screen time main characters get.
Oh.
There is an episode later in the season that I think if anyone who has watched MASH before thinks about for a second, it's really obvious which episode has the least amount of screen time for the main cast as a whole, because it only shows one of them. But we have Hawkeye, Trapper, Radar. Spear Chucker isn't considered a main character because he leaves the series so early. Obviously, Young He and Baker and all that are not main characters. Frank and Margaret aren't in this episode, and Henry's in it for exactly 45 seconds. So I think it's interesting that they were able to pull off an episode like this with as little main actors as possible. I think that speaks to the writing quality of the show. But anyway. So yeah, Henry basically says, I can't do anything about it. He'll be off the base eventually. And Hawkeye's like, yeah, we're not going to stand for that. So they attempt to do it their own way, and they go talk to Young He. And this is where, for years, I've always wondered, is Young He's portrayal overdone as a writing choice? or was it, how did I word this? Was it just a factor of the times of how Asian people were written?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we came to the conclusion that it's maybe a little bit of both, but probably mostly the latter.
Yeah.
And I know, Tyler, we had a long discussion on this.
It was, yeah, I'm trying to think of what I said, because I know that I talked about her shirt was one of the things, and then also how the fact that they just threw in random idioms from other languages, like instead of saying she, they say san, which is
So yeah,
Japanese versus.
explain that a little bit, because I think that was one of the points that I knew going into this episode.
Yeah. Well, it's blatantly apparent because she's always like, "Oh, blah blah blah, san," but san is a Japanese word or idiom. You know, it's
Yeah.
but Korean has its own version of that. It's called she, which what I was trying to rationalize with this is that, oh, well, recently, you know, there was Japanese occupation, and then the language kind of changed because of that, and actually, some Koreans adopted Japanese surnames. She kept her Korean surname or switched back though, so it doesn't really make sense that she would be using Sun, since she has a Korean name. Um, and then also on top of that, it definitely, like, the clothing she was wearing was not specific to like Korean clothing. It was just more Chinese, but I guess they were probably going for like vaguely Asian because Korea has like this thing called hanbok, which is like a very like beautiful, elaborate kind of dress, or the male version is kind of like a robe cloak thing, sort of. Um, but it looks nothing like how they even the work ones look nothing like how what she was wearing. So yeah, I do think that it's definitely like kind of a overdone, but it's also a product of its time. It's a mix of two,
Yeah.
kind of thrown together.
Yeah, I don't think they did it out of malicious intent. It was just, this is the 70s and this is how you portray a generic Asian civilian in an Asian country, is lots of hello Joe, what you know, good morning Captain San, vaguely Asian appearance and dress. But yeah, I think again, this is one of the things the show is going to get much better at for the time. But yeah, again, we're looking at this show 50 years in the, back. By today's standards, definitely, yikes. But by the fact that they're actually making, showing and trying and making an effort to portray the Korean people throughout this series is, for the time period, commendable in its own right. So it's kind of one of those weird, through the looking glass, you got to take it with a grain of salt based on the time that you're watching it from.
Yeah.
I thought they did a really good job of in episode 2 portraying the black marketeer whose name eludes me.
Charlie Lee.
Charlie Lee, thank you. Tyler, if you haven't seen that episode, it's or at least haven't in a while, it's a good one to watch because he's just a very shrewd, well-rounded businessman who will lay on the stereotypes thick to kind of play stupid around the Americans. I just thought that was great, even for being a product of the 70s.
That's the difference we talked about in that episode. Is Charlie Lee? That was the character Charlie Lee doing the over Asian stereotypes because he was fooling Henry. Versus this is someone who's supposed to be your generic civilian going about life, and it's very much written like she's, I don't want to say she's dumb, but very the Western portrayal of Asians at the time. And I think we talked about how this is only, if this is the 1972, this is only 30 years removed from the old Bugs Bunny and Disney, war cartoons that showed, the Japanese as the, stereotypical. And I remember watching a lot of, they ran them on Boomerang when I was growing up, because but it's Bugs Bunny. It's like, maybe don't. But yeah, the bucktooth, General Tojo looking Japanese, and that carried a lot of weight into the 50s and 60s of that's Asian people. And it's like, no, it really isn't, but okay. So they go and talk to Young Hee, and again, Virginia Ann Lee is fantastic. And they explain. They try to ask her like, "Do you understand that Baker owns you, and that's not okay? And do you love Baker?" And I love, again, the broken English, again, 50 years in the past, but still, I love that she's like, "Oh, Roger Wilco, no make monkey business with Sergeant Baker Slobson." And I'm like, I don't know why, but that line always makes me smile. Like, no make monkey business with him.
I need to start using the term monkey business a lot more in my day-to-day.
I mean, I wouldn't recommend it in that context. Like, hello, ma'am, would you like to come make monkey business with me? I don't know. You do you. I don't think that's gonna fly very far.
Yeah, probably not.
I've gone with worse.
Yeah,
like, in the
sure you
fair.
have.
Fair.
So this leads to our first instance of full dress uniform. I don't know if dress uniform is the appropriate term because I know the military.
Full uniform, I think.
Yeah, I know, but I don't want to say full dress uniform because the term dress uniform means a lot of different things at a lot of different times and a lot of different branches. Like there's,
Service alphas, Bravos, Charlies, different variants and stuff.
Like a Marine in their greens, that's not their dress uniform. Their dress uniform is their blues with the red stripe down the leg. And it's like, please, military fans, please don't yell at me if I say the wrong thing. I try so hard. But Hawkeye is in his, let's just say, his full officer's uniform.
Sure.
Trying to dress down Baker, and Baker's just looking at him like, you don't understand how this game works, do you? Because we've talked about it a little bit in previous episodes. Yes, the doctors are captains and majors and colonels, but they hold those ranks because they need to, both for the pay that they receive for their work and to order hospital staff around. They aren't commissioned officers. They didn't go to West Point. They are not OCS candidates. As Baker says, his authority over him is limited, and everybody knows it. Yes, theoretically he could order Baker, but as soon as he leaves Hawkeye's jurisdiction, unquote, it means nothing. So, and I remember we talked a little bit about that America in times of war technically has two armies, and this is something we're going to talk about probably more in depth later episodes. But essentially, you're going to hear the term regular army. You know, if a colonel or a general comes into camp, like, oh, he's regular army. That essentially means that they are a career military person. They didn't get drafted for this war. They're not enlisted. They made the military their career. And that's what they do even in peacetime. So they're much more seen as much more strict and by the book. So that's where that dichotomy comes from. The doctors and most of the people on the camp are enlisted or drafted at this point in history. So it leads to some very interesting situations. But this also led to a conversation where, again, owning people is bad. Can we all, I don't think that's, again, like the show, I don't think that's a hard stance to argue against. Like, no. Yes, owning people is bad. Baker could be so much worse. Let's be real.
Oh, very easily, yeah.
By 1950s standards, Baker is a paragon of righteous behavior in terms of owning a foreign human being. And I hate that that's a sentence that came out of my mouth. But it's true. I'm sure if this was a thing that was going on in the 50s, like Tyler discussed, the comfort women or owning, a family selling off their offspring as a indentured servant, I'm sure Baker's behavior, like young, he seems like she's happy, although she may not realize that her situation is not okay. She seems to be fed. Baker mentions that he taught her skills. Like, Baker is a terrible human being for owning another human being, but by 1950 standards, he's not the most terrible. By 70s and definitely today's standards, oh, you are a scum-sucking flea bag. I just wanted to point out that it's strange to think that, like, yeah, Baker could be so much worse than he actually is, but he's still a piece of crap. So.
To quote a dozen foremans I've had at a dozen different jobs, a polished turd is still a turd.
A polished turd is still a turd. You heard it here first from our most special Kansas boy.
Aww.
Oh.
My heart.
So they offer to buy Young Hee for $600, and this is the first instance of them just throwing a dollar figure out there and not having any idea what that actually means in the real world.
Yeah. Oh,
Because
yeah.
500 American dollars in 1950 is like $5,200 today. It's like increased by a factor of like 11 or something like that. It is. Yeah, we're going to get to it. So they devise a cunning plan, which I wish didn't take as long as it did in the episode, but
or at least didn't take up as much screen time.
Well, watching this episode a second time, well, I guess probably third or fourth by now, but watching it again, it seems to me like they just needed filler material. Like they filmed this and they realized, oh, wait, this is supposed to be, 25 minutes and it's like 20. And they just, well, let's put a nice pair of legs in there.
Yeah, I think watching it again, that's the part. It's like, establish that Hawkeye has an earpiece, establish that Radar is spying for him, establish that they're trying to get Baker in a position to where he has nothing left to offer except Young Hee, and then pull the rug out from under Baker and spring the trap. But instead, they throw the extra 3 minutes of Radar being distracted, which is still very movie Radar, not the Radar that I think most people have figured out by now I prefer. But yeah, I have nothing to say about the poker scene. I feel bad because I said it all in the previous episode and it still wasn't, or in the previous attempt at this episode, and it wasn't even much then. It is what it is. It's a means to an end, but it drug on way too long for me.
Yeah. Far too long.
So, like, the nurse is taking off her robe before she even gets into the shower. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Anyway,
pulls you out of the episode.
Yeah, Baker throws down. Ultimately, he owes Hawkeye a total of $2,200, which again is like $24,000 in today's money. It's ridiculous, but whatever. And basically Hawkeye says, "You want all your money back? Give me Young Hee." And Baker is kind of a scumbag and wants his money. So yes, of course, he gives Young Hee to Hawkeye, which absolutely immediately backfires. Because Young Hee is, again, one of my other favorite lines Virginia Lee delivers is, "No, I'm your Moose Hawkeye Slob son. Don't worry, I never leave you. You'll see, you be happy like hell." Again, she is a ray of sunshine in this episode.
She just looks to be having so much genuine fun acting on this show, and it warms my cold, cold heart.
Yeah. So now we get the demussifying montage. Oh no, we don't get the demussifying montage yet. We get the attempt to get Young Hee to go back to her family, number one, which is put her on a truck and send her to Seoul, kind of against her will.
Yeah.
This is where I had something to say last time that made me sad.
Oh yes, please.
Yes. So okay, this is another thing that I noticed in the episode, obviously, but so in to just kind of exactly rephrase what I said last time. In like the 50s or so Korea obviously went through, because before World War II, Korea was just Korea. There was no North or South. Before that there was like the Three Kingdoms period and like a bunch of different history, but at some point it eventually just was Korea, and then Japan came and all over them. And then in the 50s, that's when you started getting the divide North and South politically. And then with that also came the economic side of things. And initially, South Korea was actually kind of like how North Korea is today, even with like dictatorships. But Young Hee probably didn't want to go back because of the fact that economically South Korea at the time was just like how you see in North Korea today. And North Korea was the one that prospered more. The reason for that is because the Soviet Union heavily helped and backed up North Korea. Well, the US just kind of said, nah, you guys can figure it out yourself. Here's some pistols, So, it was kind of sad seeing her trying to stay, because I knew that came from like a place of like genuine fear for going back versus like just kind of a quirky, like, no, I want to come
Like,
serve you, you know?
you may be an indentured servant, but you have a comfortable living situation,
Oh, yeah.
a comfortable job. Like, again, going back to Baker is a terrible human for owning a human being, but Young He was not abused
No.
beyond being owned by another human being. Like, I
Yeah,
feel like
that-
I have to keep prefacing that, like, oh, Young He was having a grand old time. Except she was owned by a human being. Yeah, I feel like I have to keep throwing that caveat out there. But, yeah, well, and we'll see both historically and in the show eventually the Chinese get involved. And I know the Chinese also were heavily invested in keeping a buffer state between a capitalist US-backed nation and their border. So yeah.
Which is
Eventually
fair.
we'll have a bonus episode just talking about like the Korean War in general, but I definitely need to do some more research and better understand the Korean War outside of America, 38th parallel, North Korea, China at some point. MacArthur wanted to nuke China, and then Truman said, yeah, no. Like, that's like my total, and then the war was on pause forever. Like, that's my total knowledge of the Korean War other than MASH. So, but that episode will come one day.
There's this interesting movie if people are interested in learning more about the Korean War, but like from the Korean side, is I recommend checking out Korean war movies. This is completely sidebar sort of thing, but it's called Taegukgi Brotherhood of War. I'm gonna spell that out because I don't. Hold on, Taegukgi. I know how to spell it out loud in Korean, but not in English. It's
Spell it out loud in Korean. Our fans will figure it out.
But it is Taegukgi, Taegukgi Brotherhood of War. And it like kind of is like what the Korean side of the war was like. It's heavily dramatized. Like if you've watched Saving Private Ryan and thought that was dramatized, you aren't ready for Korean Saving Private Ryan.
Is it basically Korean Saving Private Ryan?
Yeah,
if it is,
yeah.
I'm watching it tonight.
Well, it was that one that I was like watching a scene from at camp randomly at like 11 p.m.
You showed me this. Okay.
Yeah, it's that
one.
one. I've watched it 2 times. I think I might actually watch it again tomorrow. But it's a really good movie. It's also
Boys
a
Korean war flick movie night.
So
it's a good movie.
So you say that nothing will beat the insane dramatization and orchestral scores that Russian World War II movies get. Like,
I haven't watched one, but I want to watch one now.
Pick any Russian World War II or they call it the Great Patriotic War. Yo, it's on a whole nother level. You think American war movies? You think Korean war movies? Do you think Chinese war movies? Yo, the Russians go hard. But anyway, from that lovely sidebar. So Young Hee comes back. She jumped off the truck, basically. And I forget... We get the demussifying montage, which I love that word, demussifying. But I think this is one of the so far, the most wholesome moments MASH has. And MASH will have quite a few wholesome moments. But just the demussifying of Young Hee is so nice. As she kind of learns, like, oh, I'm an adult human, not just this, like, lackey trailing around after this American soldier.
Mm-hmm.
But I do love once she comes back and Hawkeye and Trapper are talking and Hawkeye says, just sit there, don't clean anything. And as they're talking, she like looks over at his bed and just like leans over and starts like straightening the pillows. Like she's just like, I must be helpful. And I'm like, I love this about you, but please stop.
Honestly, that must run in like the bloodline because my mom never stops cleaning. Like that, I don't mean that from like a sexist point of view or whatever, but like I swear, like there will just be nothing wrong with the house. Then all of a sudden, like I'll walk outside of come home from work or something like that. Then it's just like adjusting pillow for no reason. I'm like, okay.
She's on the roof dusting the shingles or something. Like,
that ass like for no.
Why are you sweeping the roof, mother?
Yeah, or like the outside, and I'm like, well, cool. Like the rocks in our backyard. Sometimes she'll like wash those, and I'm like, they're rocks. But yeah.
Why are you washing?
Indeed, they are.
It's a genetic thing, predisposition.
We get Young Hee. I love when Young Hee introduces herself. hello, how do you do? My name is Young Hee. Everyone's like, yeah, good. Oh, I am also beautiful. And everyone's like, yes. I love it. So again, Virginia Lee. I think sadly, I think MASH was the last major thing she did. And then she just kind of faded into the universe, which is sad because I think she was hilarious and wonderful. We get a lovely little scene with Spear Trucker and Young Hee, and I think again it's the perfect level of like touching, wholesome moment, but also good comedy. Of Spear Trucker is trying to teach Young Hee like we look different, but we're the same, and they kind of do like they touch each other's faces, and she's like, "Excuse me, not same," and he's like, "Okay, child, please explain to me how I, an African American man, am different from you." And she's like, "You need shave," and he's like, "That is valid. That is, I can't agree with that." Which is sad because I feel like there may have been room for Spear Chucker or Ugly John, and it's a shame they both had to get cut, but okay. So next up, we get to find out that Hojan has found the head of Young Hee's family. And I don't dislike this part of the episode, but it's like
still kind of weird.
The 12-year-old doing his best Burt Reynolds, yeah, just a little off the wall.
I think Benny being like an 11 or 12-year-old is funny. 100%. I think it's comedically funny. I think if this episode had been made in like season 5 or 6, Benny would have been like 17 or 16, been like a slightly
a little more realistic.
Yeah. But this time it's played for comedy, and that's fine. But I think it would have been a little more hit a little harder on the morality message of the episode if he was like not an older brother, but an younger brother being like, hey, you got responsibilities to the family, blah, blah, blah. But whatever, it works. Benny is Benny. He's apparently smoking a cigarette, which is a choice. And even the doctor's like, no, stop that. He basically, I don't want to say blackmails. He basically tells Young Hee, you know how it works. The family needs money. We can sell you for more money because you know things now. Which one of the things she apparently knows is how to like run an IV, which we talked about last time. Like, is Young Hee the first CNA in history?
Yeah, she's the first.
She's a trendsetter. Yeah. She's a trendsetter.
She's the first pooper scooper.
Oh no, I hate. I feel like this week at work was a little harder than the last week at work.
This week at work was a bit harder. It
I
was
feel
a
like
bit
there's
harder.
a slightly different. Like you're talking about your medical experience, like it's a good job. CNAs were cool, and now this week you're like we're poopers.
It was like I got to do like all my typical vitals and whatever and all that stuff. But yeah, no, this week there was a lot more of bodily fluids involved. So
Oh no,
Tyler, I don't pretend to know anything about your job, but I do have some quotes from a good friend of mine, one of which seems applicable. I am legally licensed to wipe your ass.
Yes, that is very accurate.
oh no.
Many different types.
God bless you.
Anyway, so Young Hee leaves with Benny, and the guys are kind of dejected. And then she bursts back in like, I can make martini drink, which honestly is all I need in life. But she basically explains, like, I learned from you guys. I told my brother, like, shove off. I'm going to do my own thing. And one of my other favorite moments of Young Hee in this show is, Lieutenant Jones teach me how to make martini drink. She has much knowledge. Yes, she does. But I have something else. I am also beautiful. And I'm like, I love Young Hee so much. It's such a great character. But the episode wraps up with Hawkeye and Spear Chucker and Trapper talking about they got a letter from Young Hee. She's at a convent school in Seoul, learning things. The nuns say one day she could be helper to nurse. So literally, she's the first CNA. That's our first unofficial canon for the podcast. Young Hee is when you go to CNA school, on the wall there's a framed photograph of Young Hee.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. It's in every classroom.
100%.
Yeah, Tyler, you know those little necklaces of saints that some Catholics wear? I'm going to get you one, but it's just going to be Young Hee.
Young Hee.
I'll wear it to work.
Patron saint of helper to nurse.
We have a like a rosary. Like, a lot of the people that work where I work are Filipino, so pretty much everybody's like Catholic or some sort of Christian. So there's like a rosary up in the med room. I need to get a picture of Young Hee now. Put it up in the med room.
Jesus.
You know, like those. Yeah.
My grandmother is looking down on me, wondering if she should throw the lightning bolt for my blasphemousness. Anyway, she mentions, and speaking of the religious blaspheme, she's like, I ask God to bless you. I do that to please the nuns. I am Buddhist person. Like, okay. Cool, Youngie. And then Hawkeye jokes that he misses Young Hee because he wishes he had a better shave, and then they drag him into the shower tent to supposedly force him at gunpoint to get the worst shave of his life. But yeah, that was season 1, episode 5, The Moose. I know I did a lot of talking because we basically had this conversation 4 days ago, but
Yeah.
if any, and that's hard. And to the audience, I feel so bad because that when I realized we lost those other 2 tracks of audio, I felt so bad because I think that was probably our best episode so far.
Lightning in a bottle, yeah.
And I ruined it. It's all my fault.
And it's not yours, it's Craig, but I can't say anything bad about him yet because he still has a job to do. After we end, I'll cuss him out.
But do you guys have any thoughts that you want to share? And this is kind of interesting because we're kind of getting the distilled thoughts. You said them once, and now you've had a little bit of time to know that we were doing this conversation again. Do you have any thoughts on the Moose?
I actually wanted to ask Tyler the same question I asked him to kind of finish up the episode last time, which was, in your opinion, as someone, knowledgeable about Korean culture, how well do you think they wrote a Korean citizen by the standards of 1970 when this was originally released and today's standards?
Yeah, so this is a good question again because I don't remember what I said last time. But so for 2022 standards, I would say out of 10, it's like a 3 or a 3. And then like by 1950, 60, 70, that kind of time range, or this was 70, so I would say it's like probably a 6, 7, maybe an 8 out of 10, because there were some like notes, even though it very clearly wasn't, like a proper Korean person. It wasn't just like blatantly Tojo over the top, just like what people think like Asian is, like Orientalism and stuff, and just kind of like the buck-toothed teeth and like, round glasses and like a thick accent. Yeah, straw hat. Like they made an attempt to humanize her a lot, or she was actually like that was her whole character, was being humanized. So I would say that they did like a decent job for the time period of writing a Korean character. However, in modern times, that would for the most part absolutely not fly. I mean, maybe if you change some of the idioms up and like whatnot, you can get it in like a small film somewhere potentially, but like, if that was in a major TV show nowadays, that would be
it seems like
canceled.
It seems like what we talked about, even if they just like had her dress more Korean and speak more Korean, that would be huge points.
Oh yeah,
just taking the time as a production to go, hey, do this and this. And I think, and again, I desperately hope, especially because I screwed up the first one, I desperately hope that we can have you back for some more episodes, because I know we get like 2 Korean weddings, we get some like discussion on like superstition and like traditions in some episodes. In fact, spoiler alert, that might be one of the episodes we see Virginia Ann Lee again. But
quit spoiling my 50-year-old show, damn it.
And some of it is like, man, when I watched it initially, man, it's really cool. But after talking to you about this, it's like, oh my God, am I about to have some of my favorite MASH episodes tainted by the fact that they're super not portraying it right? But that'll be a fun conversation to have later.
Yeah, of course. The superstition one seems really interesting. There's a lot of stuff that's super vague, but for a reason.
It's super vague.
Yeah.
But so I'll ask you guys this again, And if you need to be refreshed what you said earlier, or if you want to just say whatever you're going to say, and if it changes, it changes. Out of 5, what would you rate this episode? Anyone can jump on in.
I think I went first last time, so I'll go first this time. I think I gave this episode a it was either a 3.5 or a 4. I think I went with a 4. Did I go with a 4 last time?
You went with a 3.5.
3.5.
Yes.
3.5. Yeah. I think I wanted to give it a 4, but I ended up giving it a 3.5 after having more of the additional perspective from Tyler. So
yeah, that's
yes,
and that's. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, they did good stuff, but they could have tried a little more. But overall, better than average. So 3.5.
Nice. I did the same, basically for the exact same reason. I would have given this episode maybe closer to a 4, but then having kind of this perspective of like, okay, learning things I didn't know, I definitely say 3.5. Definitely not a bad episode. Definitely a good episode, but compared to some of the episodes they're going to have later that touch on the Korean populace, definitely one of the, again, I don't even want to call it weak. It's just not as potent, if that makes sense. Wilson, what about you?
I remember I gave this kind of a higher rating last time. I think I even gave it a 4, and I'm going to go ahead and caveat that I'm going to change my mind, because as I was sitting here, talking it over with you guys, scrubbing through it and listening just kind of to it in the background, I realized, wow, this is the first MASH episode we've had so far that I genuinely feel like I'm sitting through. The jokes were few and far between, and the ones they do have, there were like 2 that really hit, and there were just some plot points that drug on way too long, like the card game. So I'm actually going to give this one a 2.5.
Really? You're going to go that far back down?
I am going to go. We're coming off Surgeon Who, even if it wasn't filmed in that order. Up the episode production list, this was actually the 5th episode they shot. And released both. So, but, coming off of one that, we all rated so highly, this just kind of feels like a letdown. And, it is nice that it's taking a stance, and it's the first one of its kind that is taking a stance, but that's only going to get it so far, especially when it's such an easy stance to take. So, hard 2.5 for me.
Wow, that took it from being your second favorite episode to your second least favorite episode.
Yeah.
Dang.
I know.
All right. And Tyler, what would you rate this fabulous episode?
Yeah, so I'm going from a 3.49 last week to a 3.39 now. Still really specific. Yeah. Because Ethan, you brought up the point.
I hate that we're recording this again.
You brought up the point of like the plot points that dragged out too long, like the card game, and I realized that I agree with that. That's kind of the main reason that I'm dropping it by 0.10 points. And that's pretty much it. But I would say that, like I said, it's a shoot, I don't remember what rating I actually gave it, but they did a
3.49. Yeah, that's what you gave it.
No, I mean of like how they did in terms of like portraying a Korean or something. Like I think
you said 6 to 8 by
6 to 8. Okay,
then standards, but
standards,
like 3 to 5 by this standards. Yeah.
By these standards, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why though is that because for their time that they were like creating this, I think they did a pretty decent job at making a humanized like Korean character, even though it wasn't super accurate. And there's not a lot of representation, especially in that time, for like Asian characters in general that are in like a good light. So yeah, that's why it's a 3.39 out of 10. Most of the deductions are for like the little inaccuracies, like the dress and stuff, and then also for like the plot points and stuff. Yeah.
All right. A couple comments from the interwebs, from our followers on Twitter. Our recurring fan, This Lightsaber Kills Fascists, gave it a 3.5. As stated, it's the first Moral Crusade episode. They'll get better as the series progresses. The card game swindle is a little far-fetched, but Young Hee is a ray of sunshine. and the Hawkeye Trapper combo is starting to click on all cylinders. It's an early episode that showcases many of the tertiary characters that will be phased out. They're used well here. I do love Hawkeye's reaction to the slur directed at Young-hee. That's worth the price of admission. Waiting for my eventual invitation to guest on the show. We'll see. Donut Eater 111 says, solid 3. The idea of the moose is interesting, although there are better message episodes. I agree. Hawkeye's scheming in the poker game is fun, if a bit odd that the soldier didn't see the earpiece. I like Young-hee herself, but that may have to do more with the acting than the writing. Same. And then this was the gentleman who might be able to give Lightsaber Kills Fascists a run for his money, her money, their money. I don't know.
It's money.
It's money.
You know, money. It is just a lightsaber.
Yes. For most interesting username on any of the platforms we are on, Big Beard Booty Daddy said, same as Wilson actually, 2.5. The first episode I don't mind skipping when I rewatch the series. There are parts I like. Young-hee tells Spear Chucker they aren't the same because he needs a shave is great. I just don't care much about this one. The poker scene just loses me. That's a lot of money for 1950. I don't disagree with that. That is a absolute buttload of money for that time for him to be just thrown out there.
Thank you for backing me up, Bearded Daddy.
Okay, never say those words in the same order again. So yeah, if you guys if anyone out there listening, or maybe you're listening through this podcast for the first time and it's still pretty recent, you are more than welcome to comment on what you think of the episodes and your ratings on our various social media. It's basically bestcare4077 on Twitter and Instagram. You can email us at bestcarepod@gmail.com or bestcareanywherepod@gmail.com, and we're on Facebook as well. And you can retroactively go back and rate stuff that we have already discussed up until we're done with that season. So you got about 8 months or even more than that, 10 months to comment on season 1 if you so wish. So, yeah. Any closing thoughts before we leave?
Oh,
I hope my boss texts me.
I hope your boss texts you too.
Yeah.
Once again, guys, sorry. I will be better prepared to not completely screw up our recordings and not have this weird, awkward trying to talk enthusiastically about the same thing twice in 1 week. But Tyler, thank you so much for being here. Please,
no problem. I enjoyed it.
Please, if there is an episode, and again, it does not have to be an episode centered around Korean people. If there's any episode that you watch through and you're like, ooh, me gusta la biblioteca, definitely want to talk about that one, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to have you back on.
Of course.
I'd love to get a CNA's angle from some of the more medical heavy episodes too.
Yeah, because at this point we've already had not changing gloves between patients, operating without masks on, leaving a patient open on the table and just walking out of the room with no one there. So yeah, I'm sure nothing more strange will happen along those lines. But thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, and with that, our next episode is Season 1, Episode 6, which I believe is Yankee Doodle Doctor? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yankee Doodle Doctor.
So,
For those of you
Yankee
who have never
Doodle
seen
Doctor.
MASH before, Yankee Doodle Doctor is an episode title.
it
Who knows?
is.
Who knows what's going to happen?
I don't.
But until then, we'll talk next time, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.